In the frozen highlands of Volar, an ancient evil stirs once more. Varric the Pale has returned, undead, unstoppable, and leading an army of spectral knights to destroy the realm he once ruled. But as the kingdom trembles beneath the pale curse, one knight is called forth, not by birthright, but by destiny. Sir Callan must rise, not just to defend Volar, but to claim a truth forged in fire. In the northern highlands of Volar, where jagged peaks met the grey, cloud-choked sky, an unnatural fog slithered through the plains like a living curse. It clung to the earth with icy fingers, staining the landscape in tones of despair. Beneath the veil of mist, something stirred, ancient, malevolent, long forgotten by the world of the living. Varric the Pale, once a mortal king turned despot, had returned, his body preserved by dark rites in a crypt caved into the glacial heart of Mount Dern, now stood reanimated, skeletal and robed in ice-threaded garments. In his bony grip, a rusted iron crown flaked with frost rested like a scar of authority. Behind him an army of spectral knights emerged, silent and featureless beneath their ghostly helms, their forms shimmering like smoke and steel. They marched without words, without rhythm, as though compelled by a single thought. Where they passed, animals fled, and trees blackened. Streams froze in motion, and the wind carried whispers in a language no man had spoken in centuries. Their destination was certain, the heart of Volar, the lush valley city of Varric, seat of kings and cradle of the kingdom's strength. Within various crumbling stone walls, panic had already taken root. Though the undead had not yet been seen, their coming had been felt. Crops wilted without explanation, cattle refused to eat, and children cried in their sleep of things they'd never been told. Temples reopened ancient grimoires, and the populace whispered of the Pale Curse, an old legend never truly forgotten. King Edric, now aged beyond his wars, sat in solitude in his solar, the silver of his beard outshining the crown that had once gleamed with youthful pride. He had faced barbarian hordes, invaders from the sea, and countless rebellions, but nothing had prepared him for the return of the dead. Knowing his sword arm had long since lost its strength, Edric summoned the one man in the realm whose honor had never wavered, Sir Callahan. The knight arrived without flourish, armor dulled from travel, his broad frame radiating quiet conviction. He knelt before the throne, eyes steady. "You've always served with loyalty, Callahan," Edric said, voice thin but unwavering. "Now I ask you to serve with legacy." He motioned to a sealed oak chest beside him. With effort, he lifted the heavy lid. Inside was a suit of armor, unlike any Callahan had ever seen, shimmering with subtle enchantment, the steel older than the kingdom itself. Next to it lay a sword, long and dark, its blackened steel pulsing faintly with veins of red light, as though something inside it still lived. "This sword was forged with the blood of my forebears," Edric said. "It awakens in the hand of one who is worthy." Callahan reached out, but paused. "How will I know when it awakens?" Edric's gaze softened, clouded with something unspoken. "All will be revealed in time. Good luck, my..." He stopped, the word caught in his throat. He turned away, voice brittle. "Go." Callahan bowed deeply and turned to leave, the weight of destiny settling on his shoulders like a second sword. As the great doors closed behind him, a gust of cold wind swept through the hall, snuffing out half the torches. The shadow of war had already begun to fall. The sky hung low over the kingdom like a mounting veil. Clouds pressed against the heavens thick and unmoving, as if the gods themselves dared not to look down upon what was to come. Beneath this brooding dome, Sir Callahan rode at the head of his battalion, 200 men armored and solemn, their standards fluttering weakly in the wind. Behind them lay Varric and his trembling citizens. Before them loomed the curse reborn. The countryside changed as they traveled. Verdant fields became pale with rot, trees thinned, then disappeared entirely, replaced by twisted stumps and dry riverbeds. Along the roads, villagers gathered to watch the soldiers pass, some with hopeful hands raised in blessing, others weeping, clutching their children tightly. A few turned their backs completely, unable to face the knights that marched toward their certain doom. But Callahan said nothing. He had no promises to give, only duty. At night, the campfires offered no warmth. The men huddled close, speaking in whispers as if afraid the darkness itself might hear them. Rumors moved like smoke through the ranks. One soldier swore he'd seen a pale rider gliding through the woods, feet never touching the ground. Another had dreamt of Eric's voice, low and commanding, calling his name over and over until he awoke, choking on ash. Callahan sat apart, his gaze fixed on the fire's core. The strange sword laid across his lap, its blackened steel remained cold, silent, not a flicker, not a stir, still sleeping. On the 5th day, they reached the edge of the haunted plains. The land ahead was lifeless, ash-colored soil, brittle glass like shards of glass underfoot. There were no birds, no wind. Even the air tasted like stone. And there, on the far horizon, stretched a sea of death. Thousands of ghostly warriors stood in perfect stillness, their translucent forms shifting with a light that was not light at all. They carried no banners, no cries for war, just silence, endless, suffocating silence. Callahan raised his hand. "Form ranks," he commanded. The men obeyed, swords drawn, shields ready. They advanced. The first clash was not clash at all. When steel met shadow, it passed through without resistance. Ghostly blades struck with icy precision, bypassing armor, ignoring flesh. Men died without bleeding, their spirits wrenched from their bodies like breath from lungs. Screams tore through the air, and still the enemy did not speak, did not break formation. Callahan fought like a man unhinged, shield broken, helm gone, face streaked with soot and sweat. He swung wildly, feeling a few revenants, but even those seemed to reform minutes later. They were losing, overwhelmed, being erased. And then, as he stood over the body of a dying squire, something changed. Callahan gripped the sword with both hands and raised it high. For a moment nothing happened. Then the blade pulsed, slowly, then violently, before erupting with a red gold blaze that turned night to dawn. The shockwave burst outward, engulfing the battlefield. The dead screamed, their forms unraveling into light. Every eye turned to him. The blade burned with an ancestral flame, alive and furious. High above, upon a hill of bones, Varric the Pale watched, his hollow eyes narrowing. He raised a withered hand and let out a low, rasping laugh. So, the bloodline endures after all. The air thickened as Varric the Pale descended from the throne of jagged black stone, nestled atop a hill, made of shattered shields and bleached bones. A crown of iron thorns rested crooked on his brow, its rusted tips digging into pallid flesh. He dragged behind him a long, curved blade, hewn from bone and bound with sinew, that screamed softly with every motion, as if the souls it had consumed still cried from within. With each of Varric's steps, the earth blackened and cracked, drained of life by his very presence. Below, Sir Callahan stood alone. The battlefield had grown still, as if time itself dared not to move. Both the living and the dead paused in eerie unison, forming a wide circle around the two titans. The flickering flame along Callan's sword grew brighter, responding to the tension in his chest, the fury, the pain, a strange echo of purpose he cannot yet name. And then he charged. The sword cleaved the air like a comet, its light a counterpoint to the gloom surrounding Varric. Their blades met with an impact that split the air open, sending a burst of heat and shadow in all directions. The first blow drove both warriors back, their feet gouging trenches in the earth. The second tore a crater in the battlefield, each strike to follow was an echo of the last, more savage, more desperate. Light against decay, flame against frost, life against that which refused to die. "You carry the flame," Varric hissed between parries, his skeletal face peeling with rage. "But you don't even know why." Callahan's jaw tightened, his strikes became wider, his movements driven more by instinct than training. "The king gave me this blade," he snarled. "That is all I need." Varric laughed, a hollow, echoing sound that rattled in the bones of every man on the field. and you are more blind than I imagined. That sword was never meant for just a knight." Callahan roared and brought his blade down with both hands. It met Varric's bone sword in a violent burst of red and white light. For a moment, time seemed to fold inward. The battlefield trembled, the undead howled, and then Callahan lunged. With a final cry, he plunged the flaming blade into Varric's chest. The impact did not split flesh, it unraveled reality. Varric's scream was not a voice, but a storm of countless cries, a tidal wave of agony, unleashed from a single mouth. His body cracked like glass, light spilling from within. His armor crumbled, the blade of bone shattered, and in one final flash of blinding brilliance, Varric the Pale was no more. Only dust, and the crown that fell into that ash. Across the field, the spectral knights faltered. One by one, their forms unraveled like smoke in the wind, vanishing into the mist from which they had come. Moments later, silence reigned, not from fear or defeat, but awe. The few surviving knights of Fuller fell to their knees, not mourning, but reverent. Callahan stood alone at the center of it all, chest heaving, his skin scorched by magic, his armor cracked and glowing faintly from within. He looked down at the sword in his hands, still burning, now whispering, not in words, but in truths. He felt it behind his ribs, beneath his skin, an ancient flame, not borrowed, but inherited. He wasn't just a knight, he was the last heir of the first flame, and the crown had turned toward him. The gates of Varith swung open to trumpets and flower petals. The war was over, and the people rejoiced. Banners of gold and white draped from every balcony, fluttering like doves above the stone streets. Children sang ballads already written about Sir Callahan, the flame bearer, the undead slayer. Bakers handed out sweet bread in his honor. Musicians played until their fingers blistered. The city hadn't known such joy in decades. But Callahan did not celebrate. He rode alone, sword sheathed across his back, his armor scorched and his gaze distant. The cheers passed over him like wind through a dead forest. He heard them, but did not feel them. The fire still burned behind his ribs, not in triumph, but in quiet, uneasy revelation. He dismounted at the palace steps and ascended alone. The guards, stunned, bowed, but did not move to stop him. Something in his bearing, something regal, warned them not to interfere. Inside the grand hall of the throne room loomed silent. King Edric sat atop the dais, not upon the throne but beside it. His crown lay in his lap, untouched. The light from the high windows framed him like a painting, noble, still, but old, so very old. Callahan strode forward, boots echoing across the marble floor. He stopped at the base of the dais, hands clenched. "You knew," he said. "No anger, just truth." Edric lifted his gaze, his eyes held no surprise, only the weariness of a man who had waited a long time for this moment. "I did." Callahan stepped closer, jaw tight. "Why me?" he asked. "Why hide it? Why let me sleep in straw while others dined in gold?" Edric exhaled slowly and stood, his joints cracked like old hinges, but he held himself tall. "Because the court would have devoured you," he said. "Because the bloodline is a blade, beautiful but sharp. I did not want you bleeding before you were strong enough to wield it." Callahan's breath caught. Edric took the steps down, one by one, until stood face to face with the knight he had secretly watched for years. "You are my son," he said quietly, "born of a moment I never meant to have, but shaped by choices I could not undo. Your mother, she was the only softness I ever knew. When she died, I buried both her and the truth." Silence fell. The truth landed harder than any sword Callahan had ever blocked. Deep down, and part of him had always known, felt the unspoken deference from some commanders, the way Edric's gaze lingered too long during ceremonies. But knowing and hearing them were not the same. Edric reached into his cloak and pulled forth the crown, a circlet of gold, simple but eternal. He did not lift it to his own head. Instead, he placed it lightly on Callan's shoulder. "You were never meant to be hidden," he whispered, "but you were meant to rise." Callahan looked into the old king's eyes and saw not pride, but peace. and perhaps remorse. The fire in his chest burned hotter, not just the first flame, but the legacy of kings, now passed not by decree, but by truth. He did not yet know what kind of king he would be, but he knew now who he was. Weeks slipped by like the fading light of autumn, steady and inevitable. In that time, Sir Callahan shed the burden weight of armor, but carried something far heavier: legacy. He no longer needed the plate and steel to command respect. His presence alone drew silence, and his words carried the force of kings. King Edric passed quietly in his sleep beneath the painted dome of the royal chapel. His final night had been peaceful, untroubled by ghosts or regrets. He had died not as a monarch, but as a man who had made peace with his past, and the son he had once hidden from the world. There was no morning parade, no grand procession, no wailing in the streets. Edric had asked for none of it. Instead, he requested a burial among the roots of the oldest tree in the palace grove, a place where kings did not rest above their people, but beside them. It was Callahan who led the ceremony, dressed in white and silver robes, stitched with symbols of the old line, the same symbols etched into the blade that had brought down death itself. The nobles watched from balconies, the people gathered in hushed reverence. Though no words passed through them, the silence was filled with meaning. When the final shovelful of earth fell, Callan did not weep. He stood over the grave with his head bowed and placed his father's crown upon the stone. A week later, beneath the high arches of Eris Great Hall, his coronation began. The nobles arrived in silks and pride, many of them still grappling with the truth of Callahan's blood. Whispers filled the wings of the hall, some resentful, others reverent. A bastard son, a hidden heir, a soldier with a crown. But none could deny what they had seen. The blade had chosen, the dead had fallen, the fire had risen. The people believed, and in their belief, a kingdom found strength. When the crown was placed upon Callan's head, this time not as a symbol of blood, but a firm flame, he did not raise his arms or smile. He simply turned to face the gathered court, eyes clear, voice steady. "I did not ask for the crown," he said, "but I will wear it for those who cannot, for the fallen who gave me breath, for the people who gave me purpose, for Fowler." The hall erupted not in thunderous cheers, but in a deep, united chant, for Fowler. The sword now rested beside the throne, its red glow extinguished, as though it too now slept. Its purpose had been fulfilled, its judgment passed. It no longer whispered in Callahan's mind. He needed no reminder. The fire was within him now, subtle, steady, patient. He sat upon the throne, back straight, gaze cast far beyond the marble walls and golden banners. There was no joy in his eyes, only resolve. Callan had not been born to rule. He had been forged for it, tempered by death, sharpened by revelation, and crowned not in entitlement, but in fire. The kingdom would rebuild, not by decree, but by example.